Okay, good morning, Natasha. How are you this morning?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, would you like to talk a bit about your life passion or what you do for, like helping other people? Yeah, do you want to talk a bit about yourself?
I guess, I started studying Chinese medicine in 99. And that continued I did a Chinese herbal major, an acupuncture major. That was like 7 years at uni. And then I started a non-for-profit with my partner in India. We did running an acupuncture clinic there, and I gave birth pretty much the same year and ended up with chronic fatigue. And I was like in a pit of chronic fatigue for like 3 years, doing really, really intensive yoga exercises, thinking, that's going to be the best thing for me. But it just burnt me. It really fried me. And that, with all of the stress of going back and forth to India, and that was a really stressful endeavor. I just kind of burnt through all of my minerals being pregnant and breastfeeding. So I started seeing an integrative doctor, and she helped me a lot. So I then went on and did 6 years part-time clinical nutrition and environmental medicine, and realized how much stress as a word. I used to kind of relate to it as, exams is stressful, relationships are stressful, but I'd never kind of twigged that your environment is stressful. If you have a pollen allergy and you live next to that tree beside your bedroom window, that is stressful. Electromagnetic frequencies, like sleeping next to your router or your Wi-Fi modem, or bright light exposure at nighttime is stressful. Sleep apnea and not breathing at nighttime, which a lot of people don't know that they're doing, is stressful. Living next to a viticulture, next to a vineyard where they're spraying copper and sulfur constantly, and that drift ends up on your roof. And, the rainwater is coming onto the roof, going into your tank water. You're consuming that every day is stressful. Like silence, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is stressful. It's just, we have, physical stress, people who are marathon runners, that's stressful, like people who work in hospitals under bright light. So we have physical stress, we have internal stress, inflammation is stressful. Poor oxygenation of our blood system is stressful. So we have all of these factors that actually impact our nervous system and our hormonal system. And if we have too many of these passive or environmental stresses, then when we encounter an emotional and mental stress, we're not performing well. So each time we encounter another stress, we do not deal with it as well as the one previously. So people can be highly reactionary. You meet these people on the street, maybe they're a family member, they don't deal with stress well. And that may be their mental relationship with stress, and it could be the conversations that they have in their head, but it also could be their environment and their internal environment that is generating a huge passive stress load that prevents them from being able to competently deal with stress.
Yeah.
So that was like a big deal for me to kind of really click as to, why I just really was not enjoying life. And I had everything. I was in a great apartment in Fitzroy, beautiful child that was healthy, wonderful partner, great job, just was not enjoying life. And I was just so burnt out nutritionally. And Chinese medicine didn't really teach me that. I didn't understand, how to read urine iodine reports, or my progesterone levels, or my zinc and copper stores. So it is really important to kind of, I feel like, to marry those two sciences in this day and age.
Yeah, amazing. So there's pretty much like stresses that come from the outside, and then also stresses that come from the inside.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So obviously we're talking about stress and different stress factors. So how can you, so obviously like you're treating people that have to pretty much figure out what stresses their body. So what are pretty much science generally for people to have stress?
Well, I guess like one of the first things that we look at, I mean, there's so many signs, but when we're really showing major impacts on our cortisol, which is cortisol, people will kind of coin it the stress hormone, but it's much more than that. Cortisol is a hormone that's released from your adrenal glands, which are an endocrine gland. They're like the size of, like, I don't know, between a peanut and a macadamia nut. They're tiny and they sit on your kidneys, like at the back, you know, your mid-back area. And they, the hypothalamus in the brain kind of communicates, and the pituitary communicates to the adrenal glands to release cortisol. And it will release cortisol under the effect of light, whether the light is coming in through your eyes or whether the light is hitting your actual skin. And we have a rhythm with light frequency as well, and that's called the circadian rhythm. So when the sun is coming up, we are already getting in tune with that rhythm that we are going to be exposed to bright light. The body is used to that and has a, you know, a cellular memory of recognizing, oh, it's going to be that time where we open the curtains and we're going to be exposed to light. So cortisol lifts and serotonin in the brain also lifts. And it should happen. We should have like a higher level of peaking cortisol in the morning, and that's healthy. And then throughout the day, pretty much around 3 p.m, it really bottoms out. And we find a lot of people where their cortisol is kind of running a bit high, and for a period of time, it can then start to fall out. People will start, you know, going towards sugar or caffeine or wanting to nap around that time. And in Chinese medicine, each organ in the body has a certain time where it is like activated and can be a bit more vulnerable. And the time between 1 and 3 p.m, I hope I'm getting that right. Oh God, it's like been a long time. It could be 2 and 4, excuse me, is the time of the kidneys. And so it's really interesting when we look at circadian rhythm patterns. You know, Chinese medicine kind of fixes the kidneys and the adrenals together as a bundle. It's one. And so we do find this vulnerability at this time for people. So if that can be a real sign that people are like, oh, I'm so washed out around 2, 3 o'clock, like can't, bit brain dead, brain fog. And then what can happen is people can either remain sluggish from there on, and just, you know, just their energy just doesn't pick up, or they'll get a second wind, and their cortisol, when they get home, they turn on all the lights in the house, they wake themselves up, and then they're up and they've got their second wind and they just can't get to sleep. So if we see circadian rhythm imbalances where people are not able to fall asleep on time, and I would say that's around 10:30 p.m, and I'll talk a bit about why that's important, or it's people are waking in the night. So the cortisol is pushing up at nighttime, and cortisol will wake us up, because when cortisol is high in the morning and when it comes down and we're exposed to darkness, melatonin that's released from the pineal gland will actually switch up, and we'll get, when cortisol is down and we're exposed to darkness, melatonin will lift, and that's our sleep hormone. And so when the melatonin, you know, and then we come back into the morning again, the melatonin drops down, the cortisol comes up. So this is called a circadian rhythm imbalance if we have any of these sleep patterns that are throwing us out at being able to sleep at nighttime. So that's probably one of the biggest ones that we find, you know, when people have got a lot of stress, we start to see it play around with our sleep. And sleep is probably one of the most important things that we can do for our body. Like, sleep scientists are saying that sleep is so biologically and physiologically beneficial for the body that sleep scientists are like asking, why did we even wake up at all? Like, shift work is touted now as a carcinogen. You know, so what actually occurs when we get deep sleep and rapid eye movement sleep? You know, in deep sleep, when our brainwave frequencies are out of this like alpha wave frequency, this kind of activated frequency, which would be when we're in a stress place. The brain oscillates at a stress level. When it drops right down and we get these like deep layers, it's very similar to meditation. The brain's oscillation, frequencies of the brain can change depending on activities and internal inflammatory chemistry. So when we get into the deep brainwave frequencies, that is when the body physiologically repairs. It detoxifies. Children grow at this period of time. Our immune system really kind of upregulates. So it is important when people are sick that they're getting deep sleep. But for a lot of people that are already in a very heightened frequency state, they're on the go, go, go all day. They're multitasking all day. They don't break that cycle of stress and tone the brain to go, okay, I'm really busy, and then pull it back and break. Tone the brain, relax the brain. Okay, go back into doing your job, and then tone the brain, doing things that actually rest the brain. If we don't tone the brain throughout the day, it can be really difficult for us to go, okay, now it's time to sleep and get into that really deep sleep habit, because deep sleep actually occurs in the earlier parts of the night. So I wear a sleep tracking device called an Aura Ring, and I don't think I've gotten any deep sleep past 2 a.m. And pretty much most of the chunks of my sleep, I'll get about maybe 18% of deep sleep before midnight, and maybe 3 to 5% of deep sleep after midnight. So if you're shifting, that, and it's a really big deal for people that are constantly going to bed quite late. They're really shortening their percentage of this deep sleep. This is when everything kind of switches off, and we're in that inky, black, dark kind of comatose type sleep. We get that physiological repair. And there's 4 stages to that sleep. And a lot of people, they get a bit of deep sleep, but they're not getting into the deepest stages of deep sleep. And so the body just isn't repairing. And, we are washing away a lot of toxic chemicals called adenosine when we are asleep. So we're kind of repairing the brain. It's brain damaging to not sleep. And we feel that, on long haul flights, when you don't sleep, you feel kind of like you've got a hangover. So that's true. You've got toxicity in the brain. So if we're not looking at our body and how our body is, but our physiological functionality is performing, we are not going to be performing well mentally or creatively, or performing well physically if we have a physically demanding job either. So there is a real science behind stress handling on a physical form, as well as that mental, psychological platform.
Yeah, so pretty much when you not sleep well, your body doesn't restore, which means you're going to feel also not really well during the day, right?
100%. You're not going to feel well throughout the day. And if you can imagine that over years, if people are going to bed and they don't close their curtains even, and they're not, their whole body is not exposed to darkness. There's got a light on the room. This is the thing with kids as well, keeping lights on in their room, because if we're not fully exposed to darkness, we don't get the biggest rise of melatonin, that sleep hormone, because it will only rise when we're in total darkness. So if we're not getting the melatonin to rise, then the cortisol will not flatline as well. Then we get something a bit more like this. The melatonin isn't as high, the cortisol isn't as low, and we're not getting into those deep states of sleep. And that year after year after year could mean, a hormonal imbalance, because cortisol as a hormone, pretty much all hormones affect all hormones in the body. So it's pretty much that simple. You can't just work on one and it's going to affect everything else. Cortisol has an effect on the thyroid functionality. Cortisol plays around with sex hormones. So cortisol affects testosterone. So men that have done shift work for 5 years will have the testosterone levels of a man 10 years his senior. It's a big deal for fertility. Testosterone plays a really big role in our ability to put on bulk, on like muscle. Testosterone has a really big role to play in our mood and on our brain. For women, cortisol actually can steal from our progesterone stores. So when we ovulate, the egg from our ovary that is released, the sac, the follicle that releases that egg, surges progesterone throughout our system from, the time that we've ovulated, day 11, day 14, if menstruation is day 1, we count that midpoint of our cycle as when that egg is going to erupt. And the sac is going to release, the follicle is going to release all of this progesterone, which then helps with estrogen to thicken our uteral lining in preparation for implantation of an embryo. If that doesn't happen, we bleed. So we want to have that really good balance of circulating progesterone and estrogen throughout our system at that time, not only for fertility, but for healthy menstruation, healthy brain, healthy skin, healthy hair, healthy bones. Like osteoporosis is very much associated with hormonal decline and vitamin D deficiency. So there are so many factors where these hormones are going to be thrown around, and we can have progesterone deficiency and have a lot of mood swings prior to menstruation. We can have, because the cortisol has stolen the progesterone, we now relatively have more estrogen circulating. And so there's no progesterone to block the endometrial tissue from always being estrogen receiving. And so estrogen, when it, attaches to estrogen receptive tissue, it's informing that tissue to surge and grow, which is why, estrogen dominance, there is a higher likelihood of things like fibroids and cysts and growths or tumors or cancers, or, we don't want that proliferative estrogen circulating, and we do want that progesterone buffer, or we'll have heavier periods or breakthrough periods where it's like, oh, I'm spotting throughout my period, or painful periods, or my breasts that's estrogen dominant tissue, they get like swollen. So we can see so many areas in the body where cortisol will completely derail us. Cortisol, when cortisol goes up, and if it stays up throughout the day because we're like too active on a physical level, on a mental level, if there's too much internal inflammation, because cortisol will lift up with inflammation, because inflammation is stressful, the cortisol will lift up. Blood glucose also lifts up. Because during a time of stress, imagine if we were, getting chased by a bear, it would be better if the body would provide us with more glucose to the brain to do that task. It's a stressful task. We need more fuel. But when glucose is constantly going up, it also will tell us to store fat. And that's when we get that mid-girth adiposity, that tire around the waist. So that's what cortisol does, is it puts that weight on. And it can be very difficult for people to shift that if their cortisol. And one of the things, the sleep scientists are saying, sleep yourself skinny. And that's why, because we're dropping that cortisol at nighttime, and we're not informing the body to keep that glucose pushing around all the night.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think the whole time about my friends that do shift work, that must be absolutely terrible for your body. Like,
it is not good. Yeah,
having, like, as you said already, that is absolutely I mean, I was kind of aware of it, but it's definitely interesting what it all does on all these different levels. So how can we break out of this? I mean, apart from changing our jobs, but like not only for people that work shift work, but I mean, what can we do to actually help ourselves to, take this stress out of the body mentally and physically?
Well, you know what? I would like to address that in two ways. And one way is, there are definitely things that I would love to share with you about how we can take self-responsibility for our physiology, for our life, for our lifestyle, for our thought processes, for our stress levels, for how we show up for ourselves, our family members, our pets, like our community, 100%. But I would also like to shift the focus upon the medicine that is being utilized today, that is very narrow-minded and we shift around between specialists that are not communicating, and we're not often going to find the root cause of conditions. Why are people living on blood pressure medication and cholesterol medication? It is a sign of stress. Yeah. So, for a lot of women who have got hormonal imbalance, whether it's polycystic ovarian syndrome or, painful periods or heavy periods, if it's not endometriosis, which is a different ball game, but for women where it's not endo and they have any menstrual issues, why are we not looking at the root causes of stress in that woman? It's a big deal, because so many of us are turning to orthodox medicine, and we are expecting our GP to show up like I do. But GPs don't study what I did. So I did 7 years of health science at uni and a 6-year postgrad. And a GP will literally do maybe 6 weeks tops on clinical nutrition. They're really good at pharmacy. They're really good at acute medicine. They're really good at preventing us from dying. Like, hats off. And they're pumped. They're working really long hours and they're very time poor. So I guess for us as a community, we also can't expect GPs to do the job that, a nutritionist or a herbalist would do on a holistic level. But I think times are changing where we do want that medicine to also change, where we can have a better dialogue with our GP about discussing root cause treatments, and GPs being more open-minded to being able to have other natural therapists have a better dialogue with them. So I've got a list of GPs that I work with that are very happy for me to do the work that I do, because they're like, you do chronic conditions really well. You do chronic fatigue, you do period pain, PMS, migraines, you do, like digestive disorders really well. You keep working with that clinician. But there is probably more so a lot of GPs that just completely damage our, the work that we do by just saying, oh, well, it's not scientific and I don't even believe in it. It's like there's 60,000 gold standard clinical trials through Cochrane Research kind of indicating what we do is effective. The whole body runs on nutrition, whether it's gaseous nutrition with carbon dioxide and oxygen and nitric oxide, or whether it's actual mineralized nutrition. You can't say you don't believe in it. It's the foundation of the human network. So, really being able to shift our eyes on how medicine is being performed today and how often we are getting band-aid treatments for chronic conditions, that needs to stop. That's probably the thing that I wanted to communicate. And, we shouldn't, as people, be having to listen to podcasts and do all of these book readings to kind of find things out about our own innate human physiology, because our doctors don't show up for us. And we didn't even learn it in 13 years of education at schooling. Like, what, they didn't have any time to talk to us about physiology or breathing. Like, breathing is fundamentally one of the most important things that we can do for our body, because as soon as our carbon dioxide levels and oxygen levels shift, our whole blood pH changes and the brain gets stressed and sends signals of stress. So, if people have got a sinus issue, or they've got sleep apnea, or from a little kid, you've got you're constantly blocked up and your parent keeps feeding you dairy and sugar and gluten, and you keep getting blocked up and it's not treated, and you're not breathing properly, and your blood oxygen levels are down and your brain is starving, you're already got on the back foot in regards to stressful living. Your brain's starving.
I mean, I can totally relate, because I'm the best example for this, because I had tonsillitis and sinuses for pretty much most of my teenage age. I had a look the other day. I was possibly more not in school than at school. And I think I lived on antibiotics. And I think I've taken antibiotics pretty much for my entire life through this time. And I really realized that I got pretty much, first of all, I couldn't swallow these tablets anymore because they were huge back then. And then also I really, formed like a fear of knowing that when their package is over, I'm going to go 2 weeks to school, I'm going to be sick again. And yeah, and then I changed the doctor and I said to the new one, you can give me anything herbal or something that eases the pain, but there's not once I'm going to take ever an antibiotic again. And I think I haven't for like 15 or 20 years. And yeah, and then I also looked at, my eating. I used to eat a bag of lollies going home from after school, because my mom was working. So my nutrition was possibly not really good. And yeah, and now it's like, and then I had heaps of teeth problems because of that, because I was possibly not having enough nutrition. And then I read also Louise Hay about my thoughts on my health. And it has changed completely. I think since I'm vegetarian / I pretty much only eat cheese, but I don't drink any dairy or anything. I have still my tonsils. I never really had sinuses or tonsillitis since I stopped eating meat as well. I'm barely ever sick, pretty much. Yeah, not at all. And
well, I would say that dairy and sugar is definitely a huge culprit, but I would not say meat is.
No, it's just for me personally.
Yeah.
And I never liked it either when I was a teenager. So yeah,
I find often people who come to me who are vegetarian or vegan will say, oh, look, I don't like the taste of meat, or I don't digest it well. For me, it's already a signal that the digestive system, there's something wrong with the digestive system.
Okay.
It may be stomach acidity, it may be pancreatic elastase, it may be bile, but we should still work on that, because meat is actually one of the lowest allergenic foods on the planet. So we're even seeing people with, debilitating autoimmune disorders, and they just, eat meat and they get better, because they're not having lectins and phytates and phenols and amines coming in from grain and vegetables. And I'm not saying that is appropriate, as a diet long term, but just saying in regards to allergy, I wanted to kind of
no, totally. No, I didn't say that in regards to allergies. I was just simply like saying that since I pretty much changed my diet.
Well, dairy and sugar.
Yeah, absolutely. But even the gluten, I mean, and then I also found now, since I'm obviously aware of it, but there's still days where even like, I don't eat a lot of gluten or flour or whatever you want to call it, like wheat, but there's still sometimes days when I eat it that I still don't feel 100% well after it, and then there are days it doesn't matter. And I read the other day that even with diet is sometimes there's some days you can also handle things better than on others, which I found super interesting.
Well, I mean, that's your stress loading as well. Like, so many people say to me, I go on holidays and I can eat whatever I want. So when we're thinking about the digestive system, we need to consider the way in which the body is navigated through like a gearing system. And so we are either in fight or flight, and then the adrenal glands are upregulated and cortisol is stimulated, and the thyroid kind of like quietens down a bit. So it's like, if we get, say, I'll take the running from a bear situation again. If we get scratched by the bear or scratched by a tree and we have to keep running, then the body's going to be like, well, look, don't respond to an infection right now. Don't even generate a fever. Just kind of like suppress that situation until we are not in a stressful situation and we can repair. So the immune system kind of switches off. So people who are very chronically stressed are like, I don't get sick. And you're like, but then they go on holidays and they get sick. So that can happen. So we're either in fight or flight, so sympathetically overdriven, or the other gear is rest and digest. So that's our parasympathetic. And we want to be in this, we want to be humming in this gear, resting and digesting. And that means that the nervous system is actually stimulating the gut. The vagal tone is going, okay, we can produce stomach acidity safely because food's going to be coming my way soon. We're in a safe environment. And we want that acidity in the stomach. The stomach itself should be like 1.5 to 2 pH. So if we're thinking about acidity on a scale, 7 is normal, and 14 is very alkaline. 1 is like battery acid. So we're only a couple of steps away from battery acid on a normal level for our stomach. Now, if the stomach isn't producing that acidity because we're always in fight or flight, we're still going to eat, but we're not going to be breaking that food down properly. We're not going to be communicating to the pancreas to release adequate amounts of enzymes to break that food right down to enable the absorption of those minerals. So we're eating, but how much are we absorbing? And if we're not breaking the food down confidently with the stomach or the pancreas, then what's going to happen is we're going to get larger particles being fed down into the small bowel. The small bowel's like, well, how am I going to absorb this? I know I will do whatever I can to break it down, and that will be through bacteria. So the small bowel is going to generate a fermentive and putrefactive bacteria to break that particle of food down. And that is most definitely going to be generating gas. And that gas could go up and cause reflux and heartburn. That gas could just get stuck and create pain and bloating. That gas could go down and we've got wind, or we could burp. So, and that over time, that sort of bacteria that is generated also damages the gut. It's damaging the immune system. 80% of your immune system's functionality is within the small bowel. It's going to impair absorption. So, our iron levels, our B12 levels, our zinc, so there is so many chronic conditions that will stem from stress. So we need to really get our finger on what is the stressor. Is it environmental? Is it internal? Do we have enough nutrients to enable, competent physiological processing and detoxification? Because we need that staff to come on board to help the body perform. And that's what nutrition is. And we get it from our diet. We also get nutrition from light and from the sun. We get nutrition from the air. So we need to look at these simple foundations of health. And so often they are missed. So often I have patients show up and say the doctor wanted to put me on depression. It's an antidepressant or it's an anti-anxiety. It's like, yeah, I'd be anxious too if I was not breathing properly all through the night. Like I'd be anxious too if I was constantly getting an adrenal spike because of an internal inflammatory disorder that's occurring within the gut, because the communication of the gut to the brain is very strong. It's very powerful. So a lot of people will say, when my gut's out, I get really anxious. So it's that is a real reaction. So do we treat the symptom of anxiety, or do we treat the root cause and go, what's going on for you physiologically? Do we treat that? Because if
I heard it. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, if we're band-aiding things, maybe it's, it's like driving your car and there's a light flashing going, there's something going on with the engine oil. We just put a band-aid over it. What's that going to do to the engine further along? Now there's another problem with the engine. Now that thing's worn out. We can just keep band-aiding it with drugs. Sometimes drugs are really important, but often if we keep band-aiding it, it was really, the initial symptom was a call out sign for the body to go, oh yeah, there's something going on here. I'm waking up with a headache every morning. What is that? What's my blood O2 levels throughout the night? You get an oximeter for $60 online. A doctor could do that. But often we're finding, that it's just, well, take a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory and stop the pain. And then, if we've got that poor oxygenation, then the blood pressure goes up. Then we start to see hormonal imbalances. Then the thyroid starts to play up. And then there's another drug for that as well. So we can see the competency in the money-making industry that is sitting behind the educational institutions that are educating doctors today. And it's pretty much funded by pharmacy, one of the most profitable businesses in the world. And I think that is something humanity really needs to look at, is do we want to continue to allow pharmaceutical industry to be working for profit? Because I think that's probably one of the major reasons why we don't have this form of education and our doctors are not working in this holistic way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's exactly what you say, because in the end of the day, it's like, we're also part of nature, and why don't, you know, look at all these things that are much more closer to us than to anything external, like a tablet, for example, you know. And then of course, like, everyone gets supplemented out now as well, by not eating, because now it's like, oh yeah, cool, you don't eat well, just take this and this, so all your other mineral imbalances and vitamin imbalances are just, so you can literally just live on pills. I was thinking that the other day, it can just like take, just don't need to eat anymore, just take B12, B, magnesium, anything, just
Yeah, well, I mean, it's
yeah,
not even just poor diet, is it? I mean, it's absorption capacity,
yeah,
and I can, rewind, that whole process of like a lot of absorption has got to do with stress.
mm,
The gut has like these
yeah,
gearing systems. The gut is very much performing at its best when we're not in a high stress situation. So we have absorption, but then we also have the food industry. So, like people will say, oh, I, eat Brazil nuts throughout the week because that gives me selenium. We need selenium for thyroid function. But that's only if that Brazil nut was grown on a Brazil nut tree in Brazil, because Brazil has selenium in its soil. And then if those nuts were stored properly to retain that selenium. So if we've got, a Brazil tree, that is growing in selenium deficient soil, like Australia, one of the most mineral deficient soils on the planet, we don't have that volcanic activity bringing those minerals up. We've got very old mineral deplete soil. So if we're growing in mineral deplete soil and not putting those nutrients back in, then we're not getting them. So it's fine to kind of do an internet search on like what is high in boron or molybdenum or manganese or magnesium. Great, good. You can see it in, on the screen, but is it in your food? Was that food grown in soil that had that mineral? And how often we're talking just simplistically about, B12 or iron, but we're not looking at all of the other cofactors that the body needs, all of those other minerals that play a really important part in balancing our physical and brain chemistry. And we wonder why, we're responding poorly to life. It's just very simple science, I think.
But I think it's also the system, because now everyone lives in the system where it's like, if you're not working 50 hours a week, and it's nearly like seen as, you made it in life when you're like super over busy. And I think, if someone says, well, I'm just working 20 hours a week, so I can also look after myself and be with my family and these and these and these. It's not so much like, it's not common, but it's all or like in a few people it is common, or in specific circles, but it's mostly on average possibly the most people work, and which is connected with stress. I mean, I think even if I would commute an hour in the morning with my car somewhere, or even for me personally, we never had a car at home, so I used to go for 18 years with public transport. This is the last thing I want to go on these days, because I just don't like it, even if it's environmentally possibly more friendly. It's just like already this massive amount of people in peak hours sitting on there just would personally stress me.
Yeah, and look, and that is really like the situation of people who are, single parents and people that are taking care of a sick relative. We have these burdens, inflation. Like, look at house prices. It's one of the most expensive countries in the world to exist on now. Like, it is ridiculous how expensive houses are, and rent. So I guess it's like that question of like, where all of our backs are literally in the corner when it comes to stress, because what do we do about it? Gas prices, food, everything is so expensive. You have to work. So
Yeah,
that is also something that I think we need to look at geopolitically as
totally.
well, as to why is this inflation occurring and who is profiteering. Like the picture, if we're going to look at this holistically and the situation of how many people are living very stressed lives, we need to look at, where is the government spending money? Who is making lots of money out there? Is
Mm.
what, if you and I were to do what the banking system does and just lend money without having the money there, and then just like make more money and send it out, we would go to prison for a really long time. But they can do it. So there are certain people who are existing, the 1%ers, that are existing with huge amounts of wealth, whilst inflation goes up for us, and we just keep shrugging our shoulders going, it is what it is, and just working and working and working and working, becoming more and more stressed. So yeah, it is difficult. It's so easy for me to say, do this, do this, do that,
No, I
for
totally agree. Yeah.
but
I
it's
didn't want
like,
to
how
say that.
many
I didn't
people
want to
do
judge
it?
anyone either. It's just more like, obviously a lot of people don't have a choice either. But
Yeah,
just only wanted to point out that it's also, the system has made you really dependent on this pretty much toxic cycle for yourself.
yes, yeah, it's really important to say it. Yeah,
And then
to
because, yeah, it is like that, because I see it in so many people, because it's also like, then, for example, you might work 45 hours a week and you are already stressed in your job, because you also don't feel every day the same, and sometimes you can't just perform on high, and then it stresses you even more out because of the pressure around you. And then you come home at night and possibly the only thing you want to do is watching a movie.
yeah,
On several devices, which means you don't want to sit there and be like, cool, now I'm just reading an article about what XYZ mineral does to my body. Because obviously you're trusting, because you are in this system, you're trusting that what you get from the supermarket is also going to, like feed you well. And yeah, that's actually really interesting what you said before, because when I did my permaculture course, and learning about growing vegetables, and learned about that actually, yeah, tomato, or like what you said, a hazelnut, like theoretically has this mineral in that fruit or in that
yeah,
nut or in that vegetable. But when it's actually not in the soil, which you also just said that Australia is super deficient in the soil, then it's also not in the tomato or broccoli or whatnot. And
mm,
and so ultimately, you also won't get it from even eating it. And theoretically, it should have it. You're not getting it in your body. And but then it's like, who knows these things, unless you're really looking, and unless you're really asking, or you're looking for these questions, or you're intuitively doing courses, and then just randomly didn't expect it and you learn it. No one really shares a lot of valuable things with you. It's absolutely incredible.
yeah. I mean, and the gold standard for when, in orthodox medicine, where they go is they refer to dietitians. And I don't want to bag on dietitians, but I'm going to. Because, I've honestly seen patients come to me who have cancer, and they've shown me what their dietitian has told them to have. And it's like, it's all packaged food. It's like, oh, have this like packaged yogurt and this packaged like shake and go protein drink, and you're just looking at it going, are you honestly serious? Like, even the food pyramid that we were taught, and all, like, it's carbohydrates is basically what we should be eating. But because those carbohydrates are so highly processed, they throw a bit of like crappy, B vitamins into it, that some people, it actually messes genetically. Some people can't process those synthetic Bs, and it totally throws them.
Mm.
And that's what dietitians have been advising us, and advising the public healthcare system. So this is also, this big issue about public healthcare. Like, where is a clinical nutritionist that is really looking at holistic medicine and healthy living playing a role in the public healthcare system? They're not. This education is not actually going out there unless you're interested and you listen to a podcast, or you've got the funds to even see somebody like me. How are you ever going to know? And, and understanding this role of like, feeling depressed, feeling anxious, feeling achy, feeling pain. It's not normal. And we've gotten to this point in time where it's become so normalized for people to feel cranky and unwell and to live on caffeine and sugar and be so disassociated from their body and so removed from the way in which their body is communicating to them through symptoms, and then turning up to a doctor that's just like, that's fine, let's band-aid it. This is really the biggest problem, isn't it? But I guess for me, personally, to get myself out of a chronic fatigue rut, I really needed to intellectually understand why I was going to do anything. So I need to scientifically understand, why would I meditate? So the Heart Math Institute has got the research. Transcendental Meditation has got over 600 gold standard peer-reviewed clinical trials on what does meditation do? What is it doing to the brain? Then what is the brain doing to the nervous system? Then what is the nervous system doing to the gut or the immune system or the hormonal endocrine system? It's a big deal. Breathing exercises, they're a big deal as well. But when people are like, I don't believe in that stuff, it's like, you can't say you don't believe in something if you have not actually looked that the science is there. So I guess it's really that, not fobbing things off at face value. And I notice, I don't often look at the news, but I do notice when I open up just, like occasionally what the news is saying. The news often is saying, is usually paying out on natural therapies.
It's true. I wanted to get some homeopathics for my cat. I could not believe how hard it is in Australia, because in Germany you can get tissue salts and homeopathic remedies just in the pharmacy, like, over the counter, but like you can just get it there. Here, I drove like 4 hours around and trying to contact different people. And then I had really interesting conversations about this, because it's constantly also that they're wanting to take actually things that are working on people gently and have no side effects off the shelf and make it that you can't use it. And then someone from the higher part of this homeopathic, taught people need to then tell XYZ, no, we can, I think it's called TBA or something, that this is actually safe to be used. And then it comes back on the shelf after 4 months. And that's like, and it's just with a lot of things. It's even with essential oils where you can't actually say, well, this helps you with this helps you with that, even though there are a lot of, researches as well done on these things that they do work. And you sometimes, as deeper as I go into this, I'm sometimes really wondering, like, what is going on? Like,
well, I mean, look, I haven't honestly studied essential oils, or I haven't studied anything about homeopathics. I've had experiences with homeopathics. But, I would just even moving into a very like much more regimented science like nutrition, basically going and doing a serum zinc test and seeing you have low serum zinc and then taking zinc. We even have people saying that's nonsense. I'm like, it's like the emperor's clothing, right? Like that to me is rather challenging. And I think really it's the foundation of how we diagnose is also very important. We could even use pharmaceuticals, I believe, in a better way if we were to have a better diagnostic system where we could say, okay, well, you're feeling really anxious now. You can use this pharmaceutical, but in the meantime, we're going to be looking at your sleep. We're going to look at your blood O2 levels. We're going to be looking at inflammation in your gut, the bacteria that's in your gut. We're going to be looking at your progesterone levels. We're going to be looking at an ECG of what's going on with your heart. We're going to be looking at inflammatory and viral load in the body. You know, like, we're going to really take some time to ask you some questions to understand what's going on. Is there something that's coming into your diet that you're not processing really well? Are you not dealing with monosodium glutamate? And that glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter. And that's what's really aggravating you. And you're getting anxious because there is a certain food that's aggravating you. Are you having anxiety because you continue to have dairy and your nose is blocked and you don't get oxygen throughout the day or the night? The brain recognizes oxygen starvation. You know, we need to ask those questions, and potentially there could be pharmaceutical buffers in the meantime. Don't have a major issue with pharmaceuticals per se, but the way that for chronic conditions, when I feel like the diagnosis has not competently been performed and given on a root cause level, that's where I have issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't say either that things are wrong, and I think also antibiotics possibly play a role, you know,
100%, they save lives.
in life. Yeah, exactly. And it's all good, but I think like often things are pretty much just overtaken, and as you said, it's pretty much the most important to help your body on a long term is to really look at the root causes rather than putting band-aids on with any sort of medication, or ultimately, you know, for me, for example, need to get your tonsils out or something. I luckily never did, but yeah, it's just like once you've found the root, it just works on all these levels, and it's just phenomenal. I can definitely relate.
Well, yeah, like what you
I've
were
been
saying,
there.
like having dairy and sugar as a kid, and a doctor could have said, oh, look, you know, you've got an inflammatory condition and there is an infection here. What are you eating? You know, and having that conversation. Or, you know, as you get older and you have a relationship with a doctor, you keep coming in with this infection. Let's look at your white blood cell count and your vitamin D status and your iron stores and your B12, and how is your thyroid functioning? Where's your urine iodine? We need to look at these, you know, these levels, going, what's wrong with your immune system? Why is it doing that? Do you have an infection in your gut that's creating an inflammatory load that's really aggravating your immune system? Are you allergic to something in your diet? Let's have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't put you on your 5th antibiotic.
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
so now,
specifically, you know, that's also not getting better, because ultimately then you can get this candida albicans, which from antibiotics, which means pretty much all your good bacteria in your stomach also die, which I then had, which also then it was like itchy all in my intimate space, because it was just killing off everything, and there was no, you know, good stuff going back in, like a probiotic or something, because it's, I guess, partly also all about awareness, like where you're aware of. And I mean, I think it's super awesome today, because at least you have the internet, you can Google anything and you can find anyone in any space around the world now that can help you with what you're looking for, you know. Well, I think like in the 90s, like I was more like, okay, I'm going with my gut intuition now and tell this guy, I'm not going to take this antibiotic anymore, and see alternative medicine people, you know. And but now I feel like it's just, you can, that's why I also do this podcast, because I really want to share some awesome people that have something awesome to say, that is, you know, so valid to know. And because I strongly believe through my own massage practice, the most important thing is you're going to be in this body for 24/7 yourself. I can help you maybe 60 minutes releasing some tension in your body, but ultimately you're going to live all the other 23 hours with this body. And it's so important that you understand how to look after your own body yourself, because then you have to also go less to any doctors or any practitioners, because you understand your own body and being ultimately healthier and happier and also better for your own self and your environment as well. And so, yeah.
Yeah, well, look, I would say that that's probably really a big foundational level when we shift into the conversation of self-responsibility for our lives and how we are mentally and showing up in our lives and for other people. And one of those things could be you do need to see somebody that's really studied and really knows how to direct you through this. I would say that can be a really big deal of like not suppressing symptoms for a long time with pharmaceuticals. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to come off all their pharmaceuticals. It's very, very tricky logistically and legally what I say around orthodox medicine. But I think that getting interested in the science behind certain practices and health practices, I think, is important for us to know that if there is something in your life that you're not enjoying, whether it's your mood, whether it's your brain fog, whether it's pain, whether it's interpersonal relationships and the way that you're triggered by people in your life, and you are part of the problem, you know, whether it's you're just not able to be creative at home or in your job, you feel like you're stuck in a rut in your life and you don't know where you're going or what you're doing, any of those things, we need to begin to start showing up for ourselves on a physical level, because this is us. And this is, you know, our brain chemistry and our inflammation has an effect on our brain and the way that we perform and the way that we are creative and our mood. So we just need to look at our physiology. That may be, you know, hormonal tests, you know, it may be nutritional tests, it may be bacterial examinations of the gut. It may be just carving time out in the morning to go for a walk or go for a jog or go to a yoga class after work, or do a breathing practice throughout the day, or begin to eat, you know, meat and vegetables rather than anything that's just a carbohydrate filler, cutting out sugars. You know, it might be breaking, you know, a drug habit or a nicotine habit. Like, there might be lots of things that we want to really understand. But like I was saying, sometimes we don't know. I see a lot of people who are very healthy come and see me, killer migraines. They didn't know that their water was filled with copper. And copper creates a lot of headaches and migraines. Or they didn't know they had sleep apnea at nighttime. They're waking up with headaches. You know, so there can be certain situations where you just don't know. So I guess it is starting to get interested and opening your mind, I think, is the first thing. Looking at your circadian rhythm, working with the sun and the moon, waking up in the morning and exercising in the morning and trying to spend time outdoors and moving your body, staying hydrated. Because when we talk about inflammation, we're looking at like red blood cells that are floating around in plasma. And in the blood, the plasma is mostly water. So the red blood cells are water transporters for gases. And without those gases going and meeting, you know, tissue and inserting oxygen into tissue, the cells in our tissue need that oxygen to be able to produce energy. And through producing energy, which is ATP, the body will make a byproduct of heat, water, and carbon dioxide. Now, if we're not getting that oxygen in, carbon dioxide is going to build. So we do need those red blood cells to have a negative charge on them, so they're not positively charging and gluing together, which is inflammation. And we need those red blood cells to be able to be in a hydrated situation, to be able to move around and transport gases. Because if we're dehydrated, we're inflamed. So there is so many, just if we explain this to kids, let alone to adults, about the importance of hydration, and that like green tea doesn't hydrate you, it's got caffeine in it. You know, like coffee, if you drink a cup of coffee or a cup of black tea, it's going to dehydrate you. So you need to drink 2 more cups of water after that. So many simple things that we could talk about that would help people with their physiology, when, you know, or talking about the importance of omegas for the brain, you know, the importance of balancing zinc and copper. I also would, you know, like to talk to whoever is creating and harmonizing the Medicare reference ranges for nutrition. They're not optimal. I'm seeing people who are coming in with depression and anxiety and fatigue, and their doctors are looking at the levels and going, you're fine. They're not fine. Those Medicare reference ranges are not fine. You know, and we just begin to shift people into optimal positions, and people don't need those pharmaceuticals. People are relieving themselves of those symptoms. So, you know, a lot of my beef is around the way that our healthcare system is run.
Yeah, I guess these healthcare systems are possibly run pretty much because they need to just deal quickly with all these people that are sick, and that's just and then possibly level their costs towards everyone that comes in, I guess, or being like big, you know, to like pay for whatever they have. And so then in the end of the day, it's yeah, possibly not really accurate, as you just said, of how to help them properly and how the readings are.
Well, GPs also have got very limited time. They're under the pump.
Yeah,
I really
exactly.
a lot of them are really doing their best and they really care, but there's only so much they can do. If our healthcare system we had a better referral network where GPs would be like, oh, I think that's a bit of a problem. Maybe also go and see somebody like me that's going to sit with you for an hour or an hour and a half and tease this out. I mean, that's really how long it takes with chronic conditions to really put our finger on the pulse. How is any human going to do that in a 5-minute consult? Yeah. So I think part of the problem does sit on the way that the government carves natural therapists out of the Medicare system, and you know it can be unaffordable for a lot of people. And part of the problem is GPs saying that they don't believe in nutritional sciences. And part of the problem is actually people not going to the wrong clinician, continuing to show up for a GP and expecting them to do a job like I would do. They're not going to do that job. So yeah, I guess that's a big deal. And then I guess it's awareness, like, you know, it's the podcasts, it's getting this information out to people so they're aware of all of the factors that are actually driving poor mood, inflammation, pain, their blood pressure, their headaches, their painful periods, their lack of being able to be creative, you know, to be able to show up in the way that they want to show up in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think then also this mental things come towards as well, that, for example, if you have, let's say, PTSD, you know, or like post-traumatic stress disorder or ADHD or all these that you have also lived with for forever and a day, even to make yourself aware of that how you operate is actually also not normal. It's just like your state of being the whole time, which has also stress on your body. I found this super interesting as well.
Yeah, well, that's like a whole other can of worms, I would say. And
no, totally. But you know, I was just saying, like, it's also plays in, because I guess, like, if you have these kind of symptoms that you're doing all day and you're not even aware of that you're doing it, and then by the time you become aware of it, you also feel like, oh wow, this has also a massive impact on my body, like on my posture, my back pain, my eating habits, you know.
You're right. Well, our lives are a consecutive string of habits.
Yeah.
Aren't they? You know, and
yes.
It can be like ruminating thought habits. It can be, you know, a trauma that was triggered that made the brain make a meaning from it that we've just carried and we haven't like dealt with and let go of. You know, that I see that a lot. People beat themselves up a lot. People martyr themselves a lot. You know, and that your health is not going to improve when you continue to exist in that sort of a way. So it's not just physiological stress. You know, we can live very stressfully through mental habits.
Yeah, absolutely.
So part of that is opening, is showing up for other people in our lives who can shine that light on the way that we're being and not be offended. Offended is like the new woke. Everyone's offended. It's like, don't be offended. Just actually like want to listen to other people's insights. If you value them and you respect them as a person, like actually let them go, you know what? You kind of are stressing out way too much about that thing, or I see you in your life continuing to do things where you're shooting yourself in the foot. Could we have a conversation? Because good friends and good family members can be as valuable as, psychs, because good friends really know you. They really know your intrinsic nature and the things that you do, and when you're playing victim and when you're doing things to get attention, even if it's negative. We can carry these things on from children.
Yeah.
So we've got to stand up and be like, I'm ready for it. Tell me the things that I'm doing. Tell me, like good friends, ask them. I'm not going to be offended. What am I doing? I bet you your friend will tell you what you need to know.
Absolutely. And I think you can feel this also, because sometimes people are not honest and you feel that they want to tell you something else, but they're not, because, of all these social things on, I don't want to upset you. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that, and I feel it's always like the difference between, you be honest because you have the ultimate goal to really help someone. Because you can see something they might not see. But also that it's a difference also between telling someone what you think and not liking someone, because just because you tell someone that you think that this might be the issue, or that might help them to come out of their circle, of course doesn't mean that you don't like that person, and I feel sometimes this is often happening when you're actually really honest and you say something, then people nearly feel like, oh yeah, and this person hates me or has a bad interest in me just because you might say something they don't want to hear, and so
we got to start to toughen
absolutely
up.
and I think, to be honest, I feel like it's so much more valuable when someone is honest, and you can be honest to someone in a safe space and actually that someone knows, hey, you are loved and this has nothing to do that I don't like you. But I think, if you change your behavior, or because sometimes even people ask you an honest questions, but they don't want to hear their honest answer. That's what I learned, because I was always far too honest, and then I had to learn in my life that people actually don't like that and they don't want to hear this, and then I stopped pretty much telling people anything. It's just like, it's just even this thing on like, how are you? It's like, does people actually care? Do you really want to know, or is this just something you just say? I guess we all do, because it's this thing, but
and that's really how we learn, isn't it? When people are like, oh, you sent me that thing and it was actually really confusing. You're like, oh, I didn't realize that. Or the way that you spoke in that tone was upsetting to me. I didn't even notice. Like, I'm gonna have to start to look at that, right?
Absolutely.
And sometimes we have to constantly be reminded. Like, I know my feedback in presentations is I speak too fast. I probably did again. But it's good for us to be able to, constantly go, oh, that is a thing. Got to work on that thing. Slow down, whatever it is, the way that people will, people can actually go, you know what, I actually think that you're doing way too much personal training. I think you've lost way too much weight, or I think that, you're hiding behind injuries and you need to go get those injuries sorted out so you can turn up and go to the gym, or those sort of conversations. I think they're important to have, and we often don't have them because it's rude to talk about somebody's weight, or it's rude to talk about someone's mental health or their habits, or, those, or you're spending way too much money on like clothes and objects when you could actually be spending that on seeing a clinician, or going to the gym, or those sort of things. I think it is a part of the, our society has become so what's the word? We're so offended that we can't take constructive criticism anymore. And we're walking around making spaces for people who are not living their lives in a healthy way. They're not in a mentally, psychologically well place. And we just keep cotton balling that situation and making space for people that are not doing the best thing for themselves. And then they're not really doing the best thing for the community either. And I think that's a problem too. It's very controversial, but I do think that's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think though that all this has really to do with stress as well.
Yeah, and the way that we're dealing with stress, and it's become everybody is stressed, right? After the handling of COVID, and I'll say the handling. And what media, if you're looking at the news, you're going to be stressed. I mean, honestly, do any of us really know what's going on? Does anybody literally trust the media anymore? So, maybe don't read it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's true. I agree. I mean, I don't have a TV for like 20 years, so neither do I watch the news, and I rather talk with people that are actually at places.
They're actually there.
They're actually there, or how actually exchanging things also with people that know more than I do, on medical levels or on any kind of levels, and then I make my mind, which I think is pretty healthy. Well, thank you so much for all this information. And is there anything I haven't asked you or you haven't said that you want to say, apart from that? I'm of course going to link all your details in the show notes so people can contact you for more questions or treatments, of course. Is there anything else you want to add?
Oh, look, I discuss stress I've got a PowerPoint presentation that runs for an entire day. So it's big. But I think that we traversed areas that I don't usually speak about when it comes to physiology, and that is really our community as a stress, and the woke community, and media, and the public healthcare system, and pharmaceutical industry, and we touched on the banking system. So I'm like, inflation. So I think we talked about a lot of things that I was like, has been stewing that I've never really said in, professional health talk. So I think that was kind of exciting. I'd be interested to hear people's criticism and feedback about that. And I'm totally open for constructive criticism. But yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
And also the last question is, because you obviously have worked in this health field, and you have sat down with yourself and obviously thought about a lot of things. What is your heart message, if you could share a message from your heart to the world? What is that like? Do you have a passionate kind of?
My heart message is that I think that gratitude is probably one of the most important and valuable positions that we can hold within ourselves. Is that often we find when we lose something that only then do we find gratitude for that thing. So don't let that happen. There are so many moments for us to be grateful for, like the way that the light is falling outside of my window. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful.
I was just thinking it.
The fun conversation that we've been able to kind of bip and bap at each other today. I'm grateful for my chair right now. I'm grateful I'm not in pain. I'm grateful that my family are all healthy. There's so many things that I can fill my heart with, where I've just completely stopped looking at the media. And today I'm going to continue to find gratitude, because it's our right. It is our right to feel grateful and to find life enjoyable before we're done.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.